Gypsy, we had discussed that CPS came to your house at one point. Remind me about that. Yeah, tell us about that.
So they did come to my house, and basically they were asking me the wrong questions.
Huh? Here's proof that people are obsessed with this case. Behind me is the notorious Menendez mansion, which has become a tourist stop for true crime fanatics. We saw people taking pics, peeking through the fence, and there's even been a tour bus.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay. How is everybody? I got a message from a Patreon supporter, Hannah, who was asking me, hey, I saw that you said that you were going to put up the unedited version of your Gypsy Rose Blanchard episode in your Patreon. I can't find it. And lo and behold, she's right. So instead of tracking down that original episode where I was so cautious and I kick myself, I mean, it's one of the things that I kick myself for being so cautious and careful and trying to put my point across, because at the time it was really Gypsy Rose Palooza. She was being celebrated. She had just gotten released from prison and she was so celebrated and everybody was so sure she was a victim. And I had a lot of questions about her story. And lo and behold, the story that we have been told appears to be the defense talking points. And there seems to be another side. So I'm going to present that other side. And it really falls in line with how I viewed the case, with the details of the case. There's some very dark details of the case. She was a full grown adult living in her parents' home. And what's interesting is that there are now Facebook groups and Reddit groups all dedicated to exposing what people feel are Gypsy Rose Blanchard's lies. And I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. And even amongst those people, they are criticizing Gypsy Rose Blanchard for not supporting the Menendez brothers. So she was asked how she feels about the Menendez brothers, and she was like, look, I don't know that case. And I feel that she does know the case. And she does know what the Menendez brothers are all about. It could not be more similar, a case where Gypsy Rose Blanchard got someone who really took advantage of someone else. She didn't do it herself, although there are people disputing that, how involved she was in the crime scene to remove her mother from the planet. And the Menendez brothers just did it themselves, and they're both saying that they were abused, terribly abused. And that's the reason as full-grown adults, they couldn't leave, they couldn't tell anyone. And as you saw in the opening, there's Gypsy Rose Blanchard telling what is her greatest supporter, and we're going to get into that. Both the Menendez brothers and Gypsy Rose Blanchard have advocates behind the scenes that are promoting or have promoted these defense narratives. So if you're wondering, Gypsy Rose Blanchard got 10 years. And it seemed to be that she was the first one willing to talk and first one to get a deal. And if you've been following my Adelson, Dan Markel case coverage, sometimes the first person to the table to get a deal gets the best deal. And she got a sweetheart deal. And since her release from prison, she's been making TikTok videos. She's pregnant, really exploiting her pregnancy, in my view. And nobody's really questioning why we have someone who's an ex-con at best as a celebrity and a person and a killer at worst as a celebrity. But it's the same kind of people that they go to, people who've had this experience in life that they exploit and get as supporters. So we thought I'd look at first Gypsy Rose Blanchard and try to debunk her story a bit. And and you'll see this is a video done by Becca Scoops. Excellent job just with research and putting it together. We're going to go through it together and look at it. And then also, I just put up a new Menendez brothers video. It gives all the updates with what's going on with the Menendez brothers case on my Patreon. But also, as I was making that video, I discovered a real blooper for the defense. It seemed like they were putting out an entirely other narrative. It was an interview done with the Menendez brothers' biggest advocate in 2018 on Megyn Kelly's show. She was connected with the Today Show. And it's way different. I don't know if you call it their alibis or the people that they told who can support their story are way different. So the way that they were supporting this story that they were SA'd was way different back in 2018. And in fact, looks very poorly supported on the Today Show. It is a jaw-dropping of a clip I have in store for you, so stay tuned for that. First, we're going to deal with Gypsy Rose Blanchard first, but I'm just really shocked at the people saying, oh, how could people fall for Gypsy Rose Blanchard, but the Menendez brothers, we should get them out as soon as possible. And it seems like in this culture, the idea of releasing someone from prison is so exciting and really aims right at our sympathies that it's like crack cocaine to Americans. They cannot get enough of this story of the wrongfully sentenced, misunderstood killer. And again in our culture, when it comes time for them, when the issue comes whether we should release them, everyone's like fully jumps on board without even thinking. Because it's so exciting, because that's the exciting side of the aisle. Something's always going to happen. If you say keep them in prison, there's nothing much is going to happen. So I think there's two elements. It's an exciting to be on board team defense for these killers, because something's always happening. And it also makes you feel like you're a good person, an understanding person, a person who has mercy, right? And isn't someone, and we love freedom in this country too. So let's get into it. Let's look at Gypsy Rose Blanchard's story. This is Becca Scoops. The link is in the description of this episode if you want to check it out.
The demise of her own mother. Blanchard committed the
course of her life, she was groomed to be a victim of her mother in the presentation of this grand con, which is presenting her as a victim of cancer and multiple other ailments. Gypsy endured having her salivary glands removed. She had a feeding tube. She wasn't allowed to have food. Her mother got her addicted to opiates. And then also restrained her from seeking freedom. And she actually had convinced family and friends and outsiders that Gypsy could not walk. So basically, her mother imprisoned her.
So my issue with this is if her mother restrained her from freedom, she was awfully bad at it because it was Gypsy Rose who stole a knife. How do you go to, I believe it was from a Walmart or a Kmart? That's my memory. How do you, if you're a prisoner in your own home, how do you get out to steal the murder weapon? Seems there's all sorts of problems. You know, Gypsy Rose says she's never swam before. She took a video of herself swimming. And then there's a video of her swimming with dolphins at Disney World. So for the naysayers, if you don't know, Gypsy Rose got her special needs boyfriend to end the life of her mother brutally so that they could live free. They also wanted her mother, it's harder to talk and think than you think. They also wanted her money. They also stole from her, similarly to the Menendez brothers, who spent $1.78 million of their parents' money, which would be in today's money. It was $700,000 back in 1989. Their parents' money in months between the crime and when they got arrested. And that was my one issue. I was saying it seemed more to me what I was making the point years ago. And of course, it was copyright struck all over the place in odd ways, which I hear is something that she does. I don't know if it's her personally or her people. So I had to I don't even know if it's still up. I believe it's still up, but it's really short. It's just my episode on Gypsy Rose Blanchard that was done right after her release. I think it's just a shadow of its former self of the episode that I made upon her release. But that was one of my questions. How does she get out if she's a prisoner? How does she make it out to steal the murder weapon?
Her and Gypsy said it best. It was a kill or be killed situation of the imprisonment she faced. I remember Gypsy, we had discussed that CPS came to your house at one point. Remind me about that. Yeah, tell us about that.
So they did come to my house, and basically they were asking me the wrong questions. So they're like, show me your arm, show me your legs. And they were checking for bruises. And at that point, my mom never hit me. They wasn't asking the right questions to me.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
Right. But then she'll say in another interview that her mother did this, that, and the other very brutally to her. And I believe that there's an interview, this is my memory of it, that there's an interview with the man who was asking those questions working for CPS, said, I asked her, is your mom doing anything? I took her aside. And she was like, no, I'm fine. Because my view of this at the time of her release is that she and her mom were basically con women. And I think she still is, Gypsy Rose. And that they were in on a money grabbing con to exploit any illness. And apparently, this is the theory, is that Gypsy Rose Blanchard has a chromosome disorder where she's missing a chromosome, and that all of these surgeries were medically necessary. Now, all the things that her mother said she had were certainly for public sympathy, cancer, et cetera, and the wheelchair for effect. And her cellmate has done an interview and said, look, her mother taught her how to talk in that baby, that Darlie Routier baby doll voice. The baby killer, like the baby, like I'm a baby, not a baby, whatever, unaliver, but baby, seriously offender that would end your life voice. It gives you the creeps when you hear it. Has anyone ever heard Darlie Routier talk? It sounds exactly like that.
Is known as the infamous woman who successfully plotted the demise of her own mother. Blanchard committed the heinous act of matricide and spent 8.5 years of a 10-year sentence at the Chillicothe Women's Prison in Missouri. You'd think that would be the end of Gypsy Rose in the limelight. You'd think after having her crime story made into numerous documentaries and a popular Hulu TV series, that Gypsy would go quietly away, that she would be desperate to fade into the woodwork and live a drama-free life. But that's not what happened. The convicted felon decided to go full throttle into the limelight, trying to sell herself as this transformed criminal who morphed into a victim and survivor, a role model for young women, an advocate working tirelessly for prison reform and for abused kids everywhere. Well, that was the plan anyway. A plan that was born many, many years before Gypsy ever knew her parole date. Somewhere along the line, someone sold Gypsy on this idea that she wasn't a criminal at all, and she definitely didn't deserve any prison time. Welcome to Becca Scoops. My partner is a veteran detective, and I'm Becca, a former psych and ICU RN. And we have investigated the mystery woman who is behind Gypsy's disturbing plans. The woman who single-handedly...
And this was also sent to me. This video was sent to me by Jenny, who's a viewer. So thank you, Jenny, for sending me this.
...handedly molded Gypsy Rose for several years. Melissa Moore. In one article, Moore says it's her fault Gypsy Rose Blanchard had become a viral sensation after she got released from prison. You'll come to see how Melissa was instrumental in pushing Gypsy's alleged lies about the crime, including about the victim Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy's co-defendant Nicholas Godejohn. In fact, the untruths about Dee Dee Blanchard and Nick Godejohn in Gypsy's book that Melissa co-authored left us speechless. Melissa is also a huge believer that Gypsy's prison sentence was utterly unjust, and Moore's behind-the-scenes antics shocked us. It's downright disturbing and appears to come from a place of pure greed. She's seeking fame and celebrity for herself. But before we get ahead of ourselves, who is Melissa Moore? Well, Melissa G. Moore popped on the Hollywood scene over 10 years ago as the daughter of the notorious Happy Face serial killer. Here's a report from 2013.
Front tonight, Melissa Moore. Her father, Keith Jesperson, is the serial...
I find all these figures really odd. The BTK killer's daughter, Melissa Moore, Diane Downs' daughter. I find their celebrity in true crime circles very odd. I don't think it's healthy for them. Do something else with your life. Don't tie your fortune to your parents' crime. It just seems so unhealthy and unhealthy for the community, too, to put them as some kind of experts.
Known as the Happy Face Killer. He killed at least 8 women, signed his anonymous confession letters with a smiley face. He's currently serving life sentences in prison. But of course, you saw him there with her when she was just a little girl. Melissa, thank you so much for coming out front and talking to us tonight. You just heard Angie, Ariel Castro's daughter, say, "We don't have monster in our blood."
Melissa used her status as the daughter of an infamous serial killer to launch her career after she got involved with Dr. Phil and Oprah.
What a weird thing to say, right? We don't have monster in our blood. Isn't that odd? Does anyone else find that odd? Doesn't that seem like an admission in the negative?
About a year after meeting you to get my head around that, the denial was so thick. I just could see the memories that we had as him as my father. I couldn't see the actions, the heinous actions that he committed. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It was just too big for me.
Yeah, but you knew about all of the crimes. You were aware of all 8 of the crimes.
I was aware of them, but to me, it seemed almost like a fictional story.
Moore's podcast, Happy Face, about her father ran for 2 seasons from 2018 to 2020. It was well received.
How do you see your father's story as a fictional story when it has such real life consequences? When people are dead, I mean, how do you see it as a fictional story? Isn't that rather callous? Am I off?
And up until that point, Melissa had been seeking her big break in the true crime genre, without any luck. Reports are after Dr. Phil felt sorry for Moore, she landed a modest gig as a correspondent on the Dr. Oz show. But that wasn't enough. She began looking for something to really catapult her Hollywood career to the next level. That's when Moore claims, after watching HBO's documentary about Gypsy, Mommy Dead and Dearest, she reached out to Blanchard in prison, hoping to talk Blanchard into some type of project. Gypsy turned her down at first.
It was about 7 years ago after Aaron Lee Carr's incredible documentary on HBO, Mommy Dead and Dearest. And I remember watching that and being completely fascinated by Gypsy's case. And that was Aaron did a great job of showing the beginning of Gypsy's story. And so I went to Chillicothe, the prison, to meet with Gypsy, and I asked her if I could do an interview at the time I was working for a daytime talk show, and she declined the interview. But we had a fabulous conversation.
However, things soon changed. Gypsy's ebook.
Right. So Robert Rand, who I'm going to talk about, who's the Menendez brothers advocate, who's also written a book on them. He's been involved with the Menendez brothers even before their arrest. He was interviewing them before their arrest. So he's been on the scene since day one, according to him. He's not the most reliable narrator, as you'll see with the clip that I'm going to show you. But here she goes to prison. She seems like she needs a new story, that she's used her father's story as much as she can exploit it. And now she's going to piggyback off another heinous crime. And she found Gypsy Rose just so charming.
Titled, Released, Conversations on the Edge of Freedom, was co-authored by Melissa Moore. In it, Moore claims for over 5 years, she spoke to Gypsy weekly for 30 to 45 minutes. The book is a compilation of their prison phone conversation and is an eye-opener. Moore's relationship with Gypsy became so...
My experience of these memoirs is that they are just filled with lies. I was going to say untruths, but really it's just lies. Let's call it like it is. From Amanda Knox's book has so many lies in it that there's 2 books that you can find about Amanda Knox's memoir, debunking it. Damien Eccles, same thing. He says Exhibit 500, which is a psychiatric exhibit of 500 of all his history of mental illness and starting fires, being cruel to animals, et cetera, that his own defense team compiled to save him from the DP. He says that was something put together by the prosecution. That's one of many whopper lies. So these memoirs of people who, of offenders should not be trusted. I know Patty from Patty's Playhouse was in the chat. She was asking about memoirs, if they're fact-checked. They usually are fact-checked. But when it comes to these kind of memoirs, they seem not to be fact-checked at all. I don't know what happens. Because who's going to sue them? The state? Maybe that should start happening. I don't know. They're just totally misrepresenting their own record over and over again. It's odd. So I would think that Gypsy Rose Blanchard is no different.
So toxic. In fact, Moore's professionalism went straight out the door. What is deeply disturbing is the role Moore played and continues to play in shaping Gypsy's false narrative and her disturbing plans to become an influencer and mommy vlogger. Remember, Moore had started out in this as a journalist investigating Gypsy. In fact, she admitted she got Gypsy's medical records and claims to know more about Gypsy's health issues than Blanchard herself.
So one of the things while doing this documentary was actually getting access to her medical records. So I've probably seen more of the medical records than even Gypsy has on her case, which I'm, wanting to share with Gypsy now.
Her not knowing her first surgery was actually before the age of 1. Even her grandfather's response, to her accusation of abuse with him. How did you decide, how to share those moments with her, on camera?
I knew she wanted to know her medical history. It was very shocking to go through her records. I was finding receipts and finding documentation like of bone marrow transplant, and I was like, wow.
Gypsy never had a bone marrow transplant. That's just an alleged blatant lie. Additionally, Moore nor Blanchard never mentioned Gypsy's real medical issue in the book or anywhere else. Moore claims she has all of Gypsy's medical records, but ignores the fact that Gypsy has a rare chromosomal disorder that can explain all of her medical procedures. Remember, Gypsy Rose's defense for plotting her mother's demise was the allegation that Dee Blanchard was medically abusing her, that Dee was suffering from Munchausen by proxy and had talked to doctors into 30 unwarranted surgeries.
How many surgeries did you have?
So many.
10, 20?
I'm pretty sure 30 more. Because I had multiple eye muscle surgeries, multiple leg surgeries, multiple throat surgeries. I don't have salivary glands, not these anymore because they were removed.
Gypsy had nowhere near 30 unwarranted surgeries, and the few she did have, according to her own diagram, we counted 4 procedures, were all allegedly tied to her rare chromosomal disorder. Gypsy does not deny the chromosomal disorder. She has acknowledged on social media she indeed suffers from this genetic microdeletion. But Gypsy downplays the rare disorder and won't recognize it in any major interviews. This point is pivotal. To acknowledge the rare disorder would be utterly detrimental to Gypsy's narrative that her mom had Munchausen by proxy, and that's why Gypsy had no choice but to plot her demise. Additionally, Melissa Moore either ignores Gypsy's chromosomal disorder or she is entirely incompetent as an investigative journalist. That's either sloppy investigative journalism or Moore is all on board the Gypsy train to sell this false narrative that Dee Blanchard had Munchausen by proxy. But that's not all. Moore also pushes the false claim that Gypsy had no choice but to murder her mother. She claims that for Gypsy it was, quote, kill or be killed, end quote.
So basically, her mother imprisoned her, and Gypsy said at best it was a kill or be killed situation of the imprisonment she faced.
Well, it's been documented that Dee Blanchard...
Right, and she also had these other plans to get pregnant. So even Gypsy Rose says it was Plan C, I believe. So one of her plans was to get pregnant. There's a video you can see online where she's showing Go to John where she wants to do it. I mean, it's bizarre that she was allowed to have him over. If it was so stifling. She's such a prisoner in her own home. But isn't it weird that Moore is presenting a memory that she didn't have? Here's when I found out that she had a bone marrow surgery. It was shocking. So it just seems like she's a fraudster. She's going on Dr. Phil, who has promoted more innocent fraud campaigns. He is friends with Jason Flom, whose money comes from Lava Records, who started a bizarre group called, I don't even know what to call it, the Church of Rock and Roll. To me, my view, it seems like a tax dodge, but okay. He was promoting it so much at one time that it had a billboard in Times Square for this Church of Rock and Roll that you could sign up to. And it happened right around the time of his divorce was happening. So I always viewed it as a tax dodge, but he had Damien Eccles, who's a twice convicted killer, marrying people in the Church of Rock and Roll. Anyway, so Jason Flom is friends with Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil has done innocence fraud campaigns for Rodney Reed, Richard Glossop. I believe Julius Jones, but don't quote me on that, a ton of these innocent, and he promotes the Innocence Project whenever he can. And Dr. Oz also got on the Julius Jones Innocence Fraud campaign bandwagon. So it's interesting that Moore goes right to those two people.
Blanchard posed no real threat to Gypsy Rose. In fact, it's well documented that Dee Dee was quite ill at the time of her demise. Dee Dee Blanchard never made Gypsy Rose ill and was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. Dee Dee was a con woman, pulling a medical con. In fact, Gypsy revealed there was no kill or be killed situation. Gypsy explained she did not want to wait for her mom to die to get away from her.
I'm like, well, I can just wait till she passes away naturally. But I didn't know how long that was going to be. And she could have lived to be 70 years old, and by that time I would be too old to do the things that I would want, like have children and have a life of my own.
Right. I don't even know if I could get her money by then. I mean, I would have to wait for that to happen. Very much like the Menendez brothers. I didn't want to wait to be disinherited and get nothing. Come on, guys. These psychopaths are always so off in their interviews. Amanda Knox, same way. They're always so off tone in their interviews. I didn't know if I could enjoy life, and I could only ride dolphins at Disney World and basically do what I want. I couldn't get all her money.
Moore also makes the other wild accusation by claiming Gypsy wasn't allowed to eat regular food by mouth, and Dee Dee got Gypsy addicted to narcotics and then restrained her from seeking freedom.
Wasn't allowed to have food. Her mother got her addicted to opiates, and then also restrained her from seeking freedom.
As a survivor of relentless child abuse, this docuseries chronicles my quest to expose the hidden parts of my life that have never been revealed until now.
My mother claimed that I was sick.
These are totally unfounded accusations. Is Moore really believing whatever Gypsy tells her at face value without doing any investigative work? You decide. In the co-authored ebook, Gypsy writes, quote, "My feeding tube was used strictly to administer me water, liquid nutrition, supplements, and medication." She adds, "When I go to county jail, I weighed 92 pounds due to a daily menu of Pediasure and other electrolyte drinks." Well, the suggestion here is that Gypsy was so underweight due to this claim that Dee Dee forbid her eating food by mouth. The only problem is weighing 92 pounds when you're 4'11" is a healthy weight. According to medical professionals, 86 to 105 pounds is completely normal. Moore backs this up by claiming the first real food Gypsy ever tasted was prison food.
Eating real food, different foods, like, she was eating prison food for the first time. That was her first taste of real food. It's prison food.
Right. So these sob stories that these kind of killers put out is not unusual. Damien Echols says he'd spent so much time in prison, he didn't know how to hold a fork. He said that when he was at a comedy show that he was worried that it was the first time that he was at a comedy show. It was the first time he didn't have to worry about violence towards him, when in fact he was on death row where he was in isolation. So I don't know when he thought that there was going to be violence upon him. I mean, that he lost his eyesight, that he had to take a Alford plea because he was dying. And his complaints were bad teeth and eyesight. Apparently, that's fatal, guys. I mean, this is a thing that's done over and over again in true crime, where you have these interviews with people who get out of prison, and they tell their sob story, making themselves the victim and totally obscuring the victim altogether. Not unusual.
Also know Gypsy gushed about getting a sugar high at Disney World thanks to all the sugary food she ingested, and there's video of her eating royal mashed potatoes, not to mention the video of her eating brownies right after the crime.
I got to go to Magic Kingdom, and I went and danced the waltz with Prince Charming and Cinderella.
Really?
That was really fun. My mom and I got the Disney dining plan, which is unlimited food.
Okay.
A human being cannot eat this much food.
Too much food?
And we went eat at Chef Mickey's. I had way too much sugar.
We also witnessed Gypsy downing a sandwich without any problems right after she was arrested.
Right, but what's weirder to me about that tape is there's no nervousness, no sadness for her mother, no remorse at what she's done. And it's those off-tone conversations that are so telling of a psychopath. But the people that the Menendez brothers aim to get as supporters are people who've had backgrounds, real backgrounds like this. And they get them to empathize and advocate for them. I know one such supporter of Gypsy Rose Blanchard has since spoken out about it.
Melissa Moore missed these examples of Gypsy taking food?
Meaning I was fooled. All I could see was my own experience, and I was friends with her in prison, and I regret it. I was, used and tossed out,
By mouth? But that's not all. Melissa makes another wild accusation against DeeDee Blanchard.
That she became addicted to pain medication and how her mom leveraged that addiction to keep her hostage.
There is no evidence Gypsy was addicted to opiates. In fact, we know Gypsy was taken to the hospital right after her arrest, where she waited hours and hours in the ER, and if she had an opiate addiction, it would have been found in the blood work. It was not. We also see Gypsy after waiting for over 20 hours and then being interrogated, and she is demonstrating no signs or symptoms of an opiate addiction. At this point, she would have been going through major withdrawals. Additionally, Moore claimed that Gypsy's dental issues were a result of DeeDee Blanchard's Munchausen by proxy, and specifically, quote, all these surgeries her mother inflicted on her, end quote.
There's a moment that she chose to share, which is when she removes her dentures. And she shows the aftermath of all of these surgeries that her mother inflicted on her.
And Gypsy's teeth issue started long before DeeDee Blanchard ever started the medical con, because that's what this was, a medical con. DeeDee Blanchard was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. In fact, forensic psychologist Dr. John Mathias from the YouTube channel Hidden True Crime explained DeeDee did not meet the diagnostic criteria for Munchausen by proxy.
Need to occur in the absence of obvious external rewards. They don't. DeeDee is clearly doing this for external rewards and for external gain, right? And so, in that sense, technically speaking, Gypsy Rose doesn't even meet criteria for factitious disorder imposed on another.
DeeDee had a history of writing bad checks and shoplifting. In fact, Gypsy wrote about her mom's cons and shoplifting in the ebook. Quote, the wheelchair is an obvious example, but my mother also taught me at a very young age how to shoplift. Sitting in a wheelchair helps to more easily knock items into your lap and shove them under your princess dress. We
like the murder weapon.
Steal random stuff at Hobby Lobby. DeeDee ran cons. DeeDee shoplifted. DeeDee had a history of this type of criminal behavior, which perfectly aligns with the known cons like claiming Gypsy had leukemia and muscular dystrophy to obtain Make-A-Wish trips and the Habitat for Humanity house. DeeDee was running a medical con, and that's what her history aligns with, not Munchausen by proxy. However, DeeDee was telling the truth when she told friends and family that Gypsy had been diagnosed with a chromosomal disorder. And and that doctors were somewhat baffled by it. Didn't Melissa Moore dig into the medical records and see the diagnosis of the rare chromosomal disorder? Didn't she watch Gypsy's interrogation video, which reveals she was eating food and going on wonderful vacations? To recap, we know Melissa Moore claims to be an Emmy-nominated investigative journalist. We know she spent over 5 years going over Gypsy's entire case and speaking to Gypsy weekly from about 2019. We know she had all the medical records. Yet, we see Moore spewing unfounded accusations like Gypsy had to kill Dee or she would be killed. Dee got Gypsy addicted to opiates to control her, and Gypsy's first taste of real food was in prison. Spewing unfounded accusations that are so easily disproven reeks of something hinky going on behind the scenes.
And recently, Gypsy was on a morning show and they asked her about her addiction, and she said, "Oh no, that didn't cloud my judgment. I was totally clear-headed when I decided to go through with this crime." I mean, come on. And a lot of people are really advocating for Nick Godejohn to get out. And frankly, I don't want him to get out either. Obviously can't put her back in, but I think they're both dangerous. I know that's an unpopular position, but I think it comes from the same place that I was talking about. It's like, I'm a good person. One of these people was just manipulated and good. I mean, think about the actual crime and how long that took and how brutal it was. And I guess maybe you could get him resentenced on his disability being a mitigating factor, but it was a really brutal crime. It's amazing that she did 8 years in just 8 years. I mean, she really conned the system. I don't know how much more of this I'm going to play. I think you guys get the idea.
But before we get to that, Gypsy, while in cahoots with Melissa Moore, also pushed a very troubling narrative about Nicholas Godejohn. Most of you know Nicholas Godejohn was Gypsy Rose's internet boyfriend who was manipulated by Blanchard to aid her with her mother's demise. Nick was diagnosed with autism. In fact, Nick's autism was so profound, he was placed on permanent disability by the government. Nick got a life sentence with no possibility of parole, while Gypsy took a sweet plea deal, thanks to this false narrative still being spewed.
Right. I don't know. Maybe it could be sentenced down a bit, but maybe. Yeah, that is very, I mean, the disparity is a lot, but people are like, let's get this guy out tomorrow. And I don't know. I'm not on board with that. This is a brutal crime. And I understand he was manipulated, but come on.
By Hollywood journalists like Melissa Moore. What makes matters worse is Gypsy and Melissa Moore's ebook, which describes Nick as, quote, hailing from Big Bend, Wisconsin, Godejohn had a criminal record for indecent exposure and had a history of mental illness. They added, he soon turned the pair's virtual relationship into one steeped in BDSM, end quote. Nowhere in the book do they mention Nick had autism and was on permanent disability. How could Melissa Moore omit those extremely crucial facts from her reporting? It just boggles the mind.
Right, because it makes Gypsy Rose Blanchard less of a victim, right? And more of a mastermind. And I could be going 24 hours a day with all the information about Gypsy Rose Blanchard caught in lies. Gypsy Rose Blanchard, this is debunking the story, the narrative that you've been sold about her. I mean, this could be all day I could be going. But I think you guys get the point. I mean, it's just wild, right? And people were, I'm sure she's going to get baby shower gifts, et cetera, et cetera. People are still really anxious to support her. It's a phenomenon I don't fully comprehend still. I think it's just that we have sympathy for the person put in front of us. But she's really drug her mother through the mud, just like the Menendez brothers have through their parents. And Jose Menendez was not a likable guy, but he did not deserve what happened to him. And Kitty has been completely... Check out my Patreon episode. There's more interviews with Lyle, just disparaging Kitty in that. Awful. So here's an interesting interview. Actually, I'm going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to go through the Menendez brothers. I think let's just have a palate cleanse, shall we? I will be right back. Don't go anywhere. See you in a minute.
We don't take a break. Grab a snack or maybe a glass of wine. Roberta will be back in no time. This podcast is listener supported, so smash that like button and subscribe or become a patron for exclusive content if you are so inclined. Have something to say? Shoot Roberta a super chat. She will do her best to read it all air without delay. Now Roberta's back and ready to put the true back in true crime. Here's Roberta.
Woo, I thought I wouldn't make it. I had to run to the bathroom. Thought I wouldn't make it back. All right. Getting into, so this is Robert Rand, who wrote a book on the Menendez brothers, runs the Menendez Brothers Case website. He's been involved in producing documentaries. So he's financially invested in the Menendez brothers story and went on Megyn Kelly to further the narrative that the Menendez brothers were essayed at the hands of their father, nothing about their mother, although that was the story that they gave in court, and that they should be resentenced to manslaughter, which is what their defense team is trying now with Mark Garagos at the helm, defense lawyer Mark Garagos, who I got to see in court representing Claire Bronfman the NXIVM hearings. But here he is on Megyn Kelly. So there is another aspect. The reason that they're going and saying that they should be resentenced to manslaughter at the end of this month is that they are using a letter, and he talks about this letter. Robert Rand said he discovered it. So this is an undated Xerox letter that they claim was written by Eric 8 months before the crime. And he says that details written in the letter verify it. So you can't age it by the ink. You can't age it by the paper. You can't do that. Just trust him. And it was written to his cousin, Andy Cano, who was the only one who testified in any detail to this kind of essay that they talk about. But I think it was a letter to coach his cousin as to what to say. And it was never brought up. Lyle says that they had it at the time of the trial. They never used it. And the other thing that they are using to say that the Menendez brothers should be resentenced is the sworn affidavit of Roy Rosello, who was in Menudo. Jose Menendez was a record executive with Menudo's, was on their label. And he said he was taken by limousine from where they were performing in New York to his home in Princeton, New Jersey, which is an hour and 20 minute on a good day with good traffic ride to his home, where his wife and kids were, he calls them boys. They would have been around 14 and Lyle would have been 18. Strangely not at university, but okay. At that time, maybe it was before then. It's hard to say. He puts the time that this happened between 84 and 85. No details. And then he says it happened 2 other times in public places. One was Radio City Music Hall. So Mark Garrigo says we know this affidavit is true because Jose only did this at his home. But there in the affidavit is 2 other times he says this happened at public places. I think that Robert Rand arranged this, but you'll see in this clip with Megyn Kelly, it is a jaw dropper of a clip. He doesn't talk about Roy Rosello because I believe that Robert Rand put that together somehow. And I don't know what Roy Rosello is getting out of it, whether he has a relative in prison who they promised him he will be helped. I don't know if he's been offered financial rewards for doing this, or if he's doing this just to benefit in the way that it made the Menudo documentary so sensational. But here's Robert Rand talking about 2 college classmates of Lyle. There's no mention of Roy Rosello. 2 college classmates of Lyle. This is back from 2018 interview with Megyn Kelly. And he claims he has evidence that Lyle told him about this essay back at college before he got kicked out for cheating, mind you. And these 2 witnesses deny it. In fact, they deny it under oath. Take a listen. In the beginning, he's talking about the letter and how it can be verified. Take a listen.
Physical, verbal, and emotional abuse. And I think that...
Wait. I'm way ahead.
Nearly 30 years ago, the horrific murder of a wealthy couple in Beverly Hills shocked the nation when it turned out their killers were their own children.
Whoa. My apologies. I shortened this down. I edited it down and I pulled up the wrong file. My apologies, guys. Be patient with me. Let me just pull it up.
Self-authenticated by content in the letter, he discusses a Christmas party that his family had just held for employees at Live Entertainment. And he also talks about the hiring of a new tennis coach, Mark Heffernan, that had taken place a few weeks before Christmas.
Could this have been something he just backdated? He just made the information appear as though it was timely, later on?
No. An attorney who is considering a new appeal is certain that this is an authentic letter from December of '88.
And normally these things are generally knowable. I mean, I assume there's forensic tests being done on the letter itself now?
That is taking place.
Okay.
That's taking place. It can't take place because it's a Xerox copy, according to John Lewitt. So, just everything out of this guy's mouth is something that you should raise an eyebrow at, in my opinion.
Okay, there's another piece of evidence that you raise, and that has to do with a guy named Glenn Stevens, who was Lyle's roommate at Princeton.
That's right.
Okay, so now we're on to the other brother, Lyle Menendez, his roommate at Princeton. Lyle also claimed that he was abused, and he had 2 Princeton roommates who testified. Both of them testified at trial, or just the one?
Yes, no, both Glenn Stevens and Donovan Goudreau testified at trial. And Lyle Menendez actually confided in both of these very close friends in the spring of '89, several months before the murders, that he had been. Donovan Goudreau and Lyle actually exchanged mutual confessions that they had been in April of '89.
But Donovan at trial denied that, right?
That's correct. And Donovan was one of my most prolific sources. I had had dozens of phone calls with him, and we taped a 2.5-hour interview.
But he testified for the prosecution, and he denied that Lyle had told to him that Lyle had been abused.
And 2 days before Donovan testified, he was very worried. He said, I am worried that they're going to ask me about the conversation when Lyle and I exchanged mutual confessions. And Donovan said, I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm not going to volunteer it, but if they ask me, I'll tell the truth. And when he was on the witness stand, he denied that Lyle had ever told him anything.
Right. That's a good sign, isn't it? That's a good sign that your source is telling the truth. When under oath, they fold and clam up. So when there's actual consequences for lying, and both of them, you'll see, deny this. It's really interesting. So this was the original plan, to go with these. So instead of Roy Rosello, they were going to go with these guys, in my opinion. But just like more, look at the way that this guy will just put out information like he has his hand on the Bible. Like, oh, I got tapes, I got this, it's under investigation. The letter can be sourced right now. Can never be sourced. It's Xeroxed. Dude. Undated and Xeroxed. And your great witnesses both say, no thanks. But what I want to know is who's paying for Mark Garagos. That's what I want to know. Is it Kim Kardashian? Is it Rosie O'Donnell? Is it someone? Is it Robert Rand? Is it someone we don't know? Doubt he has that kind of money, but okay.
All right.
Is it the Menendez family? Who's paying for Mark Garagos?
So that's the one roommate. But now this is the other roommate we're going to talk about, Glenn Stevens, and whether this guy, Glenn Stevens, what Robert says he has from him on tape, plus that letter, could possibly get these boys a new trial or out of jail early. We'll pick it up there now. Here with me now is journalist Robert Rand with more on the new evidence he says he discovered in the Menendez brothers case, which is included in his new book, The Menendez Murders, his new details. But this is something separate that actually came up more recently than the publication of the book, right? This thing with Glenn Stevens. So he's the other roommate to Eric Menendez, to Lyle Menendez at Princeton. And what specifically is he now saying?
Well, Glenn I have not spoken to him in many years, but I've been going through the hundreds of videotaped interviews I did going back to the beginning of the case in 1989 and 1990, and I found an interview with Glenn in which he talked about Lyle Menendez confiding to him that both he and his brother.
So he did not say that at trial. He was not supportive of Lyle at trial. So like the other roommate, it's sort of somebody who at trial didn't really say helpful things for Lyle, but when speaking to you say alleged that that Lyle had alleged abuse.
Right. And this is the guy who found out all this information about Roy Rosello. Isn't that interesting? This is the guy who brought Roy Rosello out of the woodwork. I'm calling BS on all of this. So, and there's pictures of him with the Menendez brothers in prison. So listen to the end of this clip.
I have an audio tape in which Glenn Stevens said that Lyle confided to him that both brothers had been abused by their fathers.
Yeah, we should note that NBC has not been able to listen to that tape. We have not yet been provided with that. And I should also say that the one roommate, Donovan Goudreau, we reached out to him. He didn't want to respond. Glenn Stevens, we reached out to him. He said to us, Lyle never told me about any abuse, nor do I remember. If you have him on tape, he says he would be shocked. But do you?
I'm happy to come back and play that tape for you anytime.
We would listen to that.
Never happened. Never happened. Never came back. Of course they would be dying. If they had, this was the most talked about element of the Menendez brothers case in 1993. Everybody was looking for someone to back up the story. Roy Rosello kept quiet. These guys denied it on the stand. And they're denying it to Megyn Kelly, or not getting in touch with Megyn Kelly is the other one. Doesn't want to even answer. Doesn't want to deal with it. But to Rand, they're like, oh, Everyone has a different story that somehow supports the Menendez brothers when they talk to Rand. I think this guy is seriously a innocence fraudster and a behind-the-scenes manipulator. That is my feeling. Because it's a great story for him to have all these first, right? It makes him money to have all these new evidence and new story. Nobody wants to hear they did it for the money story. They did it because they were getting disinherited, but you have a new story with new witnesses. Nobody got it at the time. 2 trials couldn't bring out the real truth, but I have the real truth. So I think this is what I think they were originally trying to undo the case with, and it fell flat. And Roy Rosello became it, and they kept going with this letter. I don't think they're going to have luck at the end of the month. Nathan Hochman says he's going to look it over. He's the new DA of Los Angeles since George Gascon has been voted out. And I would be very surprised if Nathan Hochman supports any kind of resentencing for the Menendez brothers. But let's see, there's a lot of public pressure. And he wants to be the moderate DA. But I know that there were people in the radical DA's office, Gascon's office, who didn't want to resentence the Menendez brothers. So let's see, according to Gascon himself. So that's what I have for today. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this episode, leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you then. Let me just check one thing. Have a great night, everybody. We're going to end it with They Did It for the Money, my song for the Menendez brothers.
Ice cream on the table, TV on the tube. You must have picked the label. Everything you heard is true. Your mom and dad, the sinner just made us blue. Crack dealers, Wells, is it boo-hoo or hoo-hoo? We did it for the money. We consoled ourselves with Rolex watches, hand-tailored suits, ran our hand over designer fabric swatches, broke into the computer. Rewrote that will. A Jeep Wrangler for a lady, paid with bloody dollar bills. We did it for the money. Kim K believes us, so does Rosie. Oh, strangers weep, we had it so bad. It's the Menendez Bros show. Just release us from prison. We'll play victims so well. Squeeze out some tears. The truth we never tell. Looking for suckers to manipulate emotions. Someone with empathy, enough to fill oceans. Just break these prison bars. They'll appear on your YouTube show. Lie and sob and wink. If you know, you know. We did it for the money. We did it for the money. We console ourselves with Rolex watches, hand-tailored suits. Ran our hand over designer fabric swatches. Broke into the computer, rewrote that will. A Jeep Wrangler for a lady, paid with bloody dollar bills. We did it for the money. Kim K believes us, so does Rosie. Oh, strangers weep, we had it so bad. It's the Menendez Bros show. Just release us from prison. We'll play victims so well. Squeeze out some tears. The truth we never tell. Looking for suckers to manipulate emotions. Someone with empathy, enough to fill oceans. Just break these prison bars. We'll appear on your YouTube show.